And so my son is already starting to display components of boy-like behavior. There's a nurture, but there's definitely a nature component as well. He's starting to get into things that he knows he shouldn't, and he's starting to give the smile, like, Jack, don't do that. And he'll be like, you know? And it's just like he knows he's doing something he's not supposed to. Now, all guys in the room here, you couldn't be told that you can't crack concrete with your head. You had to try and crack concrete with your head. And you go, oh, God, that hurts. OK, I'll remember that. Like, ooh, and so there is some literature on this whole notion of like, oh, the differences between the sexes and children is just societally constrained, and that's not true. It's not 100% either way, but for example, there's some literature that indicates that testosterone exposure in the womb alters play patterns of both boys and girls. So women or little girls who are exposed to more testosterone in the womb are more likely to play with trucks than dolls when they're toddlers, when they're children. And that boys also, girls, their prefrontal cortex thickness, that whole like, you know, I should probably listen and do this and plan into my future a little bit more, that starts to thicken and sort of reach its full thickness about 18 months earlier than boys. So on top of the fact that we are delayed in puberty, right, because women reach their full height and sort of full body at a much earlier age than we do, we also suffer the fact that our executive functioning in our brain is about 18 months behind any girl you meet at about the same age. And this carries until full maturation in your 20s. So this is great. Like, you want the cocksure 20-something who's certain he can change the world. But it's also something that you see at a young age, and it's actually nature. It's not like, oh, I just didn't care about my kid and let him play with like power tools, and that's why he's, you know, jumping out of airplanes without a parachute like Travis Pastrana or something like that. It's an element of how we learn. We have better hand-eye coordination, but worse fine motor control. Great for doing and learning through activity. Poor for sitting in a class and working like this. And this is the great debate that originally all the school was for men. And then it became, how do you make a school structure that supports women? And now we've done a really good job of that because there are more girls in college and more girls graduating high school. So now the opposite needs to be done, like boys are not mean or evil and they're not just all ADD, that we live in a high stimulation environment. We're in a high definition stimulation environment. So our dopamine button's always being clicked. Click, 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 click. You don't have ADD. Your norm is just an elevated amount of dopamine. So all of a sudden sitting in class and paying attention is mind-numbingly boring. Oh my God, it's so boring. So this is a camp, I want to say it's in North Carolina. Time magazine did a notion on it's called The Myth of Boys. It's about a 6-year-old article, 7-year-old article. But it talks about a school in Harlem, of all places, where it's an all-boys school and they graduate 100% of their people. And the principal's talking like, you know, you gotta reach them in a way that gets them interested in something. And so you had these guys who were just dragging their asses. They couldn't find something they liked. And finally, they let them set up a recording studio. And once they had that thing that they were just so interested in, everything else came up and they graduated. So they needed to do something, actual hand-eye coordination and get up and move, and it wasn't just sitting there and studying, to integrate all that behavior. So you already start to see that at a young age. My son doing things like, so he's in the tub, and he gets up, and he'll reach to the toilet, and he'll go, crack, 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 on the toilet seat. But the first time he did that, he about flipped out of the tub. I caught him, and he put him back in the tub. What does he do? Crack, crack, crack. Think about anything else you've done in your life. Oh, I'm bleeding. I'm going to do it again and learn from it. I dislocated my ring finger here when I was 15 years old playing basketball. It dislocated, the ball came down like this, and these 2 digits ended up on the 3rd digit. It looked like a lightning bolt. So I go into the hospital, and I'm walking around, and this nurse is making fun of me, like, what's going on here? And I pull off the ice pack, and she's like, oh, God. And they proceeded to give me 2 shots of numbing agent, bend the thing backwards, pull it up over the joint, and then jam it back together. They splinted me and said, don't play basketball. What did I do? I tied it to the pinky, and I went and played basketball. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a man. That's, of course, what I will do. And if you look at the And if you look at the longitudinal statistics of men, here's the best part, and then I'll move on to the next slide, which is if you look at the death rates, the amount of death split between men and women for certain diseases, trauma-related death, the men are like way up here, and there's tiny little bit for women. And then you get to like dementia and Alzheimer's and or Alzheimer's before dementia, and it's all women, and there's almost no men. I go, well, this is easy to explain. Because all of their husbands were the guys who said, hey, hold my beer, watch this, and killed themselves in this first graph, and then they just kept living and then could die of old age dementia later. So you do have to watch out for that, but you don't want to stunt that, right? You want your kid to explore. You want your kid to be in a safe enough environment to know just how serious some of these things that he's dealing with are. There's a great TED Talk recently about this, how like they intentionally, this guy came up with a camp for boys, and like they're 6 and they're like using power tools and using saws and driving cars in people's laps, because you have to learn the gravity of the situation. You can only do that by doing it. So, you know, you're supportive and you keep a long leash on them. You don't want to be a helicopter parent. But it's not a dichotomy. It's not either you're overbearing or you're totally absent and detached. There's a middle ground of knowing that we all wanted to explore. I mean, you can't help but explore. I was in the desert behind my house as a kid, coming back with cactus needles in me and a bad sunburn, and you know, running away from animals and you know, all this kind of stuff. And he's going to want to do that too, and your kids are going to want to do that too, and you don't want to stifle that. Girls want to do it too. That's actually, I mean, if you watch them at the playground, girls play just as hard as boys, just as hard. And on top of that, when they're young, they're pretty damn strong too. So at my playground, there's this like, it's a track. You can hang on it and go like a zip line, like you're some sort of a secret agent or a black ops guy. And the girls are doing it more than the boys. They grab on, they kick their legs, and like, yeah, and they go flying on the thing. And at some point, culturally, we go, that's not allowed. That's not ladylike. And you don't want to stifle either of those, because that's going to set them up for a variety of things later in life.